Yeah, the Vikings have a lot of needs, but they can kind of afford all of them in free agency, and I'm here with some targets. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Today on the show, I have a list of some free agency targets. Earlier this week, or was it last Friday, I went over all of the Vikings offseason needs. What are their, what holes need to be filled from, full-on starters to maybe more rotational players or things like a QB2 to challenge JJ McCarthy. And I came up with 10 needs, maybe 11, depending on how you feel about Mekhi Blackmon as an anointed, day one of camp starter. But for those 10, I want to kind of continue the exercise here and not only give you some names that I think are interesting for that, but talk about how that's going to fit money-wise into the Vikings salary cap plans. The Vikings have a lot of salary cap space right now. They are sixth in the league with a projected $55 million in effective cap space. That's a lot to work with. And so I popped into the over the cap salary cap calculator, entered a few contracts in. This is the way I always do this, using the amounts given by PFF's free agency page, as much as I rag on PFF for people who kind of take their grades to the bank a little bit too hard. They're way better at doing contracts than I am. I'm just going to kind of roll with that at predicting contract values. I've already said a couple of pretty dumb ones this offseason. So I'm going to let them do that for me, but I will punch them all in, do the math, and let you know where we stand. That's going to be the goal of the day. Before we get into it, I put out a quick feeler on Blue Sky and asked, hey, what kind of salary cap questions do we have? The cap can be confusing. There's a lot of math to it. If you're not somebody that enjoyed math class a lot, it can be all kind of Greek to you. But you might still have questions like, what can they do about this problem? How do these certain things work? So I am going to try to straighten out some of the questions that I got there. If you have other questions about the cap, if there's just stuff you're like, man, this confuses the heck out of me. How come this works? What the heck is a void year? All that stuff. Leave them in the YouTube comments. I'll go through as many as I can, or you can always send me an email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. Put it in the Twitter Tuesday doc in the show notes, and I'll get to it on a Tuesday. But I'm here for you for that. Okay. Let me be a resource. So one of the questions that came up is a philosophical one, and I like it. It's from Nick Lewis, who said, teams are so clever about moving money around that doesn't feel like there's a limit, and it feels like creativity is the limit. And the question is, do you think the NFL will put a cap percentage limit on quarterbacks at any point? The current trend feels unsustainable. I don't think that a rule will be put in place. I think eventually there will come a point where teams will no longer feel it is worth it, right? Once a quarterback is taking up 50% of the cap, they'll get punished for that. Right? I don't think that they had gotten there. Maybe we're starting to flirt with the point where it starts to have downsides that aren't worth it. But I don't know. The quarterback is so important that an overinflated portion of salary cap for a quarterback is appropriate. Unless you have a guy on a rookie deal and it's this big advantage and so on. Jojo asked, what does it mean to convert salary to signing bonus? Also, if a player is traded, what stays with the original team and what does the other team take on? Okay, that's two questions. So when you hear restructured contract, usually it's talking about a salary to signing bonus conversion. And I'll make the numbers super easy for you. Let's say I'm a player and I make $10 a year. Okay, I'm really bad. I don't do a lot for you, but you're going to give me $10 every year. And let's say you want to open up a little bit of cap space by converting my $10 to signing bonus over, we'll call it a 5-year contract. Again, we're making the numbers very easily. So it's going to make cash and cap diverge. It's a very important thing to understand. Cash is very different than cap. Cash, the actual money that shows up in players' bank accounts that they go buy houses with. And cap is the actual, like, officially logged burden on the salary cap that needs to stay under. In terms of cash spending, there's no limit. You spend as much cash as you want to spend. In terms of salary cap, there is a limit. And the things eventually get squared up over time. They must. It's like kind of how all the systems work. So it turns cap into cash, basically. So I get my $10 right away. And there's language in most player contracts that allows a team to click this restructure button and convert as much salary into signing bonus as they ever want. Because all that means is I get a salary advance. So every player's like, yeah, you can do that whenever you want. Absolutely. Don't even call me. Just do it. I'll just appreciate more money in my bank account faster. Nobody's got a problem. And then what that does is it prorates across the life of the contract. That means that of my $10 that was going to cost $10 this year now costs $2 in each of the 5 years of the contract. $2, $2, $2, $2. So suddenly you just saved $8 on the salary cap. Hooray, you did it. The problem is it spread all that money out and it kicked the can down the road. If you do that too much, you end up in situations where that money is not further restructurable. You can't restructure it again if it's already prorated across, and so that money's kind of locked in. You get too much locked in money, you start losing flexibility. If a player gets traded, what stays with the original team and what does the other team take on? Prorated bonus stays with the original team. So if I did restructure contracts and I've got all those prorated burdens, I cannot get rid of those even by trading the player. Everything else goes with them. Roster bonuses, incentives, general salary, whether it's guaranteed or not, everything else goes with them. The Swede asked, how did the Vikings balance Darisaw and Jefferson's contracts, and how do you see them managing other contracts? So Rob Brzezinski has a way of structuring contracts that is essentially a 5-year plan. And it's not always a 5-year contract, but it still takes a 5-year shape. So the first 2 years of a given contract, if it's a long-term one, will be pretty low cap burden. The base salary will be pretty small. The signing bonus, they will use signing bonus very liberally to make, to give the player enough money up front to be satisfied, but to keep the initial cap hit low. And then in the third year, usually it's structured such that the contract can be cut in the third year, but it's painful to do so. So you're probably not going to cut that player in year 3, but if it's some total catastrophe, there is an out if it's bad enough that you're willing to take the pain. And then years 4, year 5, that's when a lot of the money kicks in, and that's also when a lot less of it is guaranteed. And then you can restructure, you can start approaching about pay cuts, you can trade, you can cap casualty, and you can kind of not necessarily pay up all the money that is initially reported in the contract value. So that's kind of how things work with the Justin Jefferson deal, although a lot more of it is guaranteed. And the thing is, if you go to these deals on like Over the Cap, if you just look up like Justin Jefferson contract on Over the Cap, and you go to the little drop down that says cut pre-June 1, and you change that to restructure, you will see in each year how much money they stand to save if they restructure that contract. And you'll see it's like $18 million a year. It won't be the same every year, but they can save $18 million in whichever year they choose to like push the restructure button with him. And, they can kind of just continue it from there. But his cap hits, Jefferson's cap hit this year was 8.6. His cap hit next year is 15 mil. Like, that's not so bad. His cap hit in 2026 is 38 million. Maybe you want to start clicking the restructure button or something like that. Or maybe by 2026, that's not even that bad of a cap hit. So you can make decisions accordingly. Nick Chapman, this is the last question I'll do here, asked if a player has void years on their deal, then gets franchised and then traded, how would it affect them trading the player away in terms of cap hit? So if you have void years on your deal and you have money like structured into those void years, that money is sticking with the team no matter what. There's no way out of it. Franchise tagging the player and then trading him away is the same as trading him away normally. But what is interesting is in looking this up, I learned that that it depends on the void date of that contract. So for example, Harrison Smith's contract is set to void on March 16th. That's after the franchise tag deadline is passed. So like Harrison Smith cannot be franchise tagged. he's not like eligible for that because he'll still technically be under contract on what is still technically a multi-year deal. It would be like franchise tagging Dallas Turner. That would make no sense. He's already on a different contract. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. And I don't see any of the Vikings players getting franchise tagged really, unless you want to talk about like the Sam Darnold tag and trade thing, but that's a topic for a different day. And I don't think is particularly likely. Okay. So hopefully we've laid a little bit of foundation. We got you thinking cap wise, right? Thinking about contract sizes and, multi-year cash flows. So let's get into some actual names and talk about some of the exciting players that could be Vikings in this coming March. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's Locked On Vikings episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's $300 just to keep the action going. Just put $5 on whatever it is, some alt over under for Commanders, Eagles, that's like 19.5 that you get at minus 600,000 that you get no juice on at all, but you can get your $300 in bonus bets, assuming that you win. The FanDuel app is great. It's easy to navigate. It's got all the tools you need for live betting, for putting together crazy same game parlays. I know y'all love to do that. FanDuel has you covered no matter how you like to gamble. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Let's get into this free agency thing. So to review, if you missed the Friday episode, go listen to that for my thought process talking through the Vikings roster and what their actual needs are in free agency. So the way I'm going to do this is I am going to consider the draft not a thing. And I don't want a single like dire need going into the draft. Maybe you've got players that you want to upgrade on, like Blake Brandel or Garrett Bradbury. But if there is a guy that started last year that's coming back, that's not like a holy crap, we have to use our first. It's not a forcing first round need, right? And I don't want a forcing first round need. If you're going into the draft with Blake Brandel and Garrett Bradbury on the O-line, but there's a really good cornerback available, you are free to select that cornerback. But if you go into the draft with no cornerbacks and there's a guard available that you want, you kind of still have to take a corner. And I don't want to be like priced into that. I don't want to be pigeonholed in that way. I want the roster to at least be such that I can justify not taking a corner. I don't want it to be like 2020 was for the Vikings, where they had to take a corner. There must have been a corner. That guy turned into Jeff Gladney. That's how you end up with Laquan Treadwells. That's just not a good draft strategy. So I had to review call it a QB2, but a QB 1A, 1B kind of type to compete with JJ McCarthy. You need a running back. You need a right guard, I'm going to say, because, Dalton Reisner is walking and Ed Ingram got benched. They probably feel they need a right guard. I'm saying an OT3, but pretty much it's a guy to paper over the beginning of the season while Christian Darrisaw is still hurt, so some kind of left tackle to fill in there. A couple of interior D linemen, a couple of cornerbacks, and a couple of safeties. I'm actually going to make an adjustment to that and say that if you only get one safety, but you get another cornerback in, you can just be a traditional nickel team instead of a big nickel team. And Brian Flores' scheme actually perfectly can work that way. It is not required to have three safeties on the field at all times. It's just that that's been the best Vikings D-backs this whole time. If that's no longer true, he definitely doesn't have to do it. And it gives us flexibility to kind of sign who we can, which actually comes in handy doing this exercise. I'm also going to use the PFF free agency page's contract projections and the over-the-cap calculator to put this all in and see where our cap is at the end. And I'm going to do a little bit of Rob Brzezinskiing here with these contract structures to try to keep it a realistic simulation. I'll be honest, I was kind of lazy about it. I'm going to be a lot less detailed than Brzezinski is, but we can hopefully get a rough back-of-the-napkin idea. All right? So let's start with the QB2 thing. This is going to be Daniel Jones. I'm going to give Daniel Jones the Sam Darnold contract, adjust it for inflation of cap. It's an $11 million deal, 1 year deal. I even void yeared a little bit like the Sam Darnold one was. I copy pasted, gave him the Sam Darnold contract. I don't believe in Daniel Jones as a quarterback at all. This is not what that's about. I believe that he gives you a floor. I think he's a low end starter. He's the 30th best QB in the league kind of type, right? And that gives you a great kind of bang for your buck. It's cheap for a quarterback, right? You're not spending $35 million on somebody, and you can kind of have a fairly expensive backup. Or worst case scenario, JJ McCarthy sucks, or he gets hurt again, or his knee is degenerative and it's over. Then you've got somebody in that isn't you're not trotting out like Brett Rippon. Like you're going to be okay, even if you probably don't have the highest expectations for the season. But we just went through a season where that exact thing happened, and it turned out pretty well. So you're at least running that back and seeing, okay, now we talk about what can Daniel Jones do with Kevin O'Connell and all that. Like that's the worst case scenario, and the better case scenario is that JJ McCarthy is better than Daniel Jones. But there is no world where you have a quarterback on the field who is worse than Daniel Jones, right? That's what I mean by giving you a floor. For running back, I am also going to keep a guy that was in the building. I'm going to just go with Aaron Jones. Look, there's Najee Harris. There are some names out there that are interesting at running back, and I do think this is a really good draft class to get a running back to pair with Aaron Jones, but I want to bring Aaron Jones back. I think I'm just planting my flag there. I would like Aaron Jones to return to the Minnesota Vikings. I'm going to give him the same deal, again, adjusted for cap inflation. It's going to be like $8 million. PFF gave him $7 million over 2 years. I'm going to give him $8 million over 1. And because he has some void years on his contract, extending him actually gets a lot easier on the cap. So I'm going to do that and say, hey, let's run this back with Aaron Jones one more time, and then bring in another youngster. Maybe bring back Cam Akers, but I didn't go that deep in this exercise. But and then have some competition in the room. But I definitely would want to be adding a rookie to this room. But it's not a first round need now. Like I'm talking maybe somebody at some point in day 3, like I'm good with that. Let's talk about guard. So one thing about center too, if you're like super keen on replacing Garrett Bradbury, which I am not, I think it's fine. But there's the only like true blue starter on PFF's list. Like the only guy in the top 100 players at all that's a center is Drew Dalman. So like there's literally one. And I mean, he's had plenty of his issues as well. So I don't think this is a free agency class to like go out and spend a bunch on a center unless you want to go get like the one guy. But I more so foresee the Vikings just rolling with Garrett Bradbury. He's pretty cheap. So even if he does play subpar, at least it's not costing you a lot and you just roll with that. But at guard, there are a lot of options here. A lot of people talk to me about Trey Smith. PFF has him costing like $20 million a year. I don't want to spend that on a guard. And I also don't think that the difference between him and like the other guys on the list is like worth that. I think the value is a little bit better elsewhere. But that said, like the guiding principle here is don't just take a cruddy player just because he's cheap, right? So who is out there that I feel good about that also isn't going to break the bank? And the answer to that is Kevin Zeitler. He's older. It's only a 1-year deal. This is another one where I would love to get a rookie in the building, even if it's a 5th rounder, right? Like give me a crack at a David Yankee to just see if he develops, right? Because sometimes that guy's a Brandon Fusco and it works. Or sometimes it's a Blake Brando, right? And he ends up actually starting for you down the road. But like he just needs time, right? If you need a day 1 starter, that's got to be a high draft pick. And I actually think that drafting a guard at 24 is a reasonable idea for the Vikings. But I'm not allowing myself to rely on that. Instead, let's bring in an old guy in Kevin Zeitler, $6.75 million, not going to break the bank, and he's still very much a good player. Every single one of the players along that Lions offensive line was good, and I don't know if the Lions let him out the building, but I'm not worried about that in this exercise. He's on the list, and so I'm going to take him. Then for that Christian Darrisaw replacement guy, this is not somebody I need a lot from, and so this is absolutely not. I mean, I'm not going out there and getting the premier tackles in the league. That are all going to be no. I'm looking at your Jedrick Wills tier dudes that have some starting experience, can paper over a couple years, but you're basically not looking to spend any money on these guys at all. I'm trying to save as much as possible for the needs on the defense, where I do want starters, I do want multi-year deals, and I do want to kind of build that foundation of pros and basically try to do again what the Vikings did with Grenard and Van Ginkel and Cashman, where not only were those 3 good signings, but those are 3 good signings that were multi-year deals. Those were long-term, good investments. So I want to try to do that again on defense, but to do that, we can't exactly spend a lot on the OT3. How about Joe Noteboom? I kind of like him. I liked him every time I watched the Rams, whether it was the 2 games against the Vikings or games I watched preparing for those games against the Vikings. I always thought it was okay what he was doing as kind of a borderline backup starter type in place of Rob Havenstein. I like him fine enough. I'm going to give him $2.5 million just to be like a depth player that can just be like kind of the next David Quessenberry, but someone you trust a little more than David Quessenberry for a prolonged period of play. Let's move it on to the defense. And this is where there are a lot of options here. It's a good free agency class, especially on the back end. There's a lot of corners. So if I don't say the name you're thinking, it's okay. The name you're thinking is probably around the same price. So in terms of the mathematical exercise we're doing here, it feels pretty good. But these are also the contracts that I had to do a little Rob Brzezinski screwery with, if you get my drift, to make it all fit. But I did make it all fit pretty well. And we don't have too crazy of cap burdens to deal with, so long as you're okay with restructuring a few contracts 2 years down the road. I'll get to that. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's Locked On Vikings episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a finance management app. So if you're like me and you're not very good at like tracking your spending or what you maybe aren't spending too much money on, or subscriptions that you forgot about that are costing you money, you don't even realize it, Rocket Money is for you. It's a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and lower your bills by pointing out where you can maybe cut back. You can hit whatever financial goals you have this year with Rocket Money. They have over 5 million users, and they've saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, let's get to the meat of this free agency. We haven't spent much money at all. All right, we've got a quarterback. We spent $8 million here, $6 million there. We haven't gotten to the big stuff, okay? And we're still not going to get to the big stuff because the first thing I'm going to do on the defensive line is re-sign Jonathan Bullard. I am going to pound the table for this for the next 2 months, okay? I'm going to be really annoying about this, so just, prepare for that. But I think that Jonathan Bullard is a true blue starter. I think he's a good enough run defender, and I think he's going to be cheap. I think that it would be asinine to let him go and try to replace him with another guy you're less familiar with that will likely be more expensive, and you don't even know if he's going to be as good. Just bring back the devil you know. I think that's beautiful. I gave him $2.75 million. It's not going to have a huge outsized impact on anything. For the other guy, think of this as the Jerry Tillery replacement. I've been calling it lovingly the Dean Lowry memorial role, the honorary Dean Lowry. But this is kind of the guy that it's been. And I think both this year and last, the Dean Lowry hasn't quite been good enough. Jerry Tillery had some moments. He had some plays that I think he did more than I expected from him. There were people thinking that maybe he wouldn't even make the team. That was probably a little far. I don't think I went that far. I don't know. Cold take me if I'm wrong. Because he had some moments, but overall, he also kind of lost his job to Jalen Redmond at the end, who is re-signed, by the way. I totally forgot when I did the needs thing that Jalen Redmond was re-signed, and he's not just an ERFA. I don't know what the contract details on that are yet, though. But we want someone with a pass rush, right? But the thing is, I don't need a Sheldon Richardson that's like a designated pass rusher. I don't need like a 275-pound designated pass rusher that like only comes in on third downs. We need more than we do need an every down player. So you need to defend the run some, and I just want someone that has some semblance of a pass rush. How about, there are a couple of names that were interesting to me. Jaron Reed was actually a really interesting name to me. He's a little bit longer in the tooth, and he would be a cheaper option. I'm going a little more for broke, and I'm taking another guy from the Lions trenches. Can you tell I'm a fan of what the Lions have done in the trenches this year? Levi Onwuzurike has enough of a pass rush, but also is a more balanced player. PFF has him at $8.25 million a year. I think that's perfectly fine. And I scaled it a little bit, but nothing crazy. And I scaled it less than the Vikings typically do. So I'm still kind of front loading some things a little bit more than we're used to seeing from Rob Brzezinski, just to try to keep things from getting out of hand too much down the road. Okay, it's time for the secondary. No needs at linebacker. Let's go to the secondary. I need 4 D-backs. Put it that way. 4 DBs. And then you've got Josh Metellus, you got Mekhi Blackman, you got Theo Jackson, some level of rotation between those three guys, add 4 players. But 2 of the 4 players that I'm quote unquote adding are re-signings. I'm re-signing Byron Murphy and Cam Bynum. Last time I did this, I said numbers that were way too high. PFF has put out numbers that you're probably all going to be a lot more comfortable with. Byron Murphy at 17.3 mil a year. I did some gnarly contract stuff with him because he already has void years on his deal, so I might as well use him. So I think his first year 1 cap hits like 3 mil or something like that. And it works out perfectly fine because not only do they have a lot of cap space this year, they have a lot of cap space in future years. So I'm not like over at all. There's no restructuring that I need to do or anything like that, but I am going to do this. I'm going to backload this structure a little bit. And then Cam Bynum, I'm going to do the same thing with 14.25 mil a year. I said something like 20 mil. I do think that these might be underestimations. But I'm very bad at this, so don't take my word for it. I just am looking at the historical rate, especially for someone like Byron Murphy, who has the highest average annual value projection on all cornerbacks PFF has. And I think that they're right for it. He's a Pro Bowler that was like 3rd in the league in interceptions. I do think he's going to make closer to 7 or 8% of the cap, which is more like 22 mil. I think I said like 26 last time. That was probably too much, but I still think that this is conservative, but I'm going with the numbers that of the people that have a better track record than I do. And so we'll just roll with it for now. So here's what we got to do now. I need at least 1 more corner. And then I put down 1 more safety. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually get 2 more corners, become a traditional nickel team, because I just like the names better. I just think this is a way to get better players on the field, and that's ultimately the goal. I don't need to stick to the exact same plug-and-play structure that they had last time. Last time they ran 3 safeties because they had Harrison Smith, Cam Bynum, and Josh Metellus. Now they have Josh Metellus and Theo Jackson at safety. You probably want Josh Metellus out there, but what if I could get you DJ Reed and Mike Hilton? Let's do that. Mike Hilton, I love Mike Hilton. Mike Hilton has been a pet favorite player of mine since the Bengals Super Bowl run in 2021 when he first came across my consciousness. He is projected to get 11 mil a year. DJ Reed is projected to get 14 mil a year. DJ Reed is probably my favorite corner in this class. There are lots of options here. I might not have said your guy, but there's Charvarius Ward. There's Asante Samuel that somebody Sam Ekstrom thinks is a pretty likely option. There's bringing back Shaq Griffin or Stephon Gilmore. There's Carlton Davis. And then at safety, there's Javon Holland. There's Justin Reed, Trevon Moehrig, Talanoa Hufanga. Like, there are so many names all over the place. All of their prices are similar-ish enough to each other for us to do this math and call it back of the envelope, apply a big margin of error, and you can replace whatever names you like if you don't think Cam Bynum's good enough and you'd rather have Justin Reed or whatever. Like, sure, go ahead. So where that brings us with some of the contract tomfoolery that I did, which I won't bog you down with the specifics of, it leaves us with $7 million in cap space for 2025 with a completed free agency. And now we have at least some kind of respectable starter at every position. That lets us go into the draft with all kinds of freedom. And by the way, with only 4 draft picks in hand right now, $7 million should be enough for the draft class and practice squad and all that stuff. The $10 million rule of thumb is for like a full draft class, but the Vikings have traded away a lot of picks, so we don't have to quite try to make that money. I did have to do a couple of things to bring it back down. I did click a restructure button on Harrison Phillips just to save an extra quick $3 million. I don't think that's fully necessary, but it seemed like having $7 million felt a little better than $4 million, and it's pretty much nickels and dimes spread out throughout the next few years. So I felt pretty comfortable with that. So here's the problem. This is all fine until you get to 2027, right? 2 years down the road, the Vikings already are looking at 26 mil over the cap if I do all of this stuff and I sign all of these contracts, because I backloaded a little bit of it and I used up too much money. However, pertinent to the question that I answered earlier in this thing, there is like a full $40 million in restructures between Grenard and Hawkinson, Jefferson, Darisaw, that all very much look like they are meant to be used to solve this exact problem. And so my prediction here, looking at the Vikings cap structure, the way that their salary cap has been handled so far, is that internally in the Vikings, there is a plan to overspend this year and next year because they know they can get that money back in 2027. And that allows them to be really, really aggressive in free agency for the next couple of years. So I am anticipating an exciting and fun March. I hope that's fun. And then they can deal with those problems in 2027, do the math problem, do the restructure thing. And you can get away with that for years and years and years before the chickens come home to roost. For Kwesi, pretty good chance that by the time the cap is so much of a problem that you have to start doing things, he might not even be here anymore. That's what Rick Spielman did. And yeah, he got fired, but he managed to have some really aggressive free agencies in the meantime, in the headliner of which is going out and getting a full quarterback contract in free agency in Kirk Cousins, and all the money ended up going to that. But boy, they sure weren't cheap. They sure were spending a lot, and the Vikings can do the same thing here. I know a lot of people are really uncomfortable with the kick the can down the road thing, but we've seen teams play with this quite a bit, and this is not like a decision you make where you get like credit card debt and it becomes overwhelming in 2 years. This is, if you want to think of it as credit card debt, this becomes overwhelming in like 9 years. Like, we do not have to worry about this until 2038. And by then it's like, well, by then the die is kind of cast one way or another. So I'm perfectly comfortable with it. I think the Vikings are in a fantastic spot in terms of the resources available to help them with their needs. The problem is all this stuff has to work. So if you've sat here and you heard me talk about this and went, ugh, they're bringing back Jonathan Bullard, that's not good enough. Or, ugh, Kevin Zeitler, man, I don't want him. Well, then you've kind of stumbled upon the issue, which is there's too many needs. We're not going 10 for 10 on this, you know? They went kind of 10 for 10 last year, and it feels a little bit like a miracle. That's really hard to do. But we'll see what they do, and we'll see what kind of exciting names come down the pipe. There are a lot of options here, especially in the secondary. And while I've said some names, they are far from the only ones. So I will talk to you tomorrow. And as always, Skull.